Ethan's hand was shaking when he texted me, "Meet me at the roof tonight. I need to tell you something before I lose my nerve." I read it 4 times before I understood I'd been holding my breath the whole time. That's the sentence that started everything. Not "Hey," not "What's up," just a boy on the 9th floor of a college dorm, asking me to climb 4 flights of stairs to hear something he was scared to say out loud. I didn't know yet that by midnight, my whole understanding of us would be rewritten. I didn't know that in 6 hours, his mouth would almost touch mine and neither of us would move away. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started, 3 years earlier, the day I met the person who would quietly take over my whole life without either of us noticing. My name is Caleb Reyes, and freshman year I got assigned the worst dorm room on campus, a shoebox on the 2nd floor of Whitmore Hall with a radiator that either roared like a jet engine or did nothing at all. My roommate was late moving in. I sat on my bare mattress for 3 hours, listening to other people's families laughing in the hallway, feeling like the only person in the world who'd shown up alone. Then the door banged open and a tall, windblown guy backed in dragging a duffel bag twice his size, cursing under his breath at the narrow doorframe. He looked up, saw me, and went completely still, the kind of still that happens when someone realizes they've been overheard. "Please tell me you didn't hear that," he said. "Which part? The one about the doorframe's mother, or the one about its ancestors?" He laughed, really laughed, head back, and something in my chest loosened that I hadn't realized was tight. That was Ethan Park. 6 foot something, dark hair that never sat the same way twice, the kind of easy warmth that made strangers feel like old friends within 10 minutes. I didn't know it yet, but he'd become the person I measured every good day against. We were inseparable within a month. Not in the loud, public way some friendships are, ours lived in small things. He learned I couldn't sleep without noise, so he left a fan running even in winter. I learned he got quiet, not loud, when he was upset, so I stopped trying to fill his silences and just sat in them with him. We built a friendship out of 1,000 unremarkable Tuesdays, and somewhere in there, without either of us naming it, it became the most important relationship in my life. By sophomore year we'd moved off campus together, into a cramped 2-bedroom above a laundromat that smelled permanently of fabric softener. We told people we were just roommates so often it became a joke between us, a joke that, if I'm honest, started feeling less funny every time I said it. Because somewhere between freshman year and now, I'd started noticing things I had no business noticing. The way Ethan's eyes crinkled a half-second before he actually smiled. The way he touched the back of my neck when he walked past my chair, like it was nothing, like it didn't light up every nerve ending I owned. The way I'd started timing my whole day around when he'd walk through the door. I told myself it was nothing. Best friends are close. Best friends are affectionate. This is normal. I was lying to myself, and some quiet, terrified part of me knew it. It happened on a Tuesday in October, I remember, because Ethan hated Tuesdays and I'd started leaving him coffee outside his door on Tuesdays just to make them better. We were on the couch, some forgettable movie playing to no one, both of us more interested in the bowl of popcorn between us than the screen. Ethan reached for a handful at the same time I did, and our hands collided in the bowl, and neither of us pulled back right away. I looked up. He was already looking at me. The room went very quiet. Not silent, I could hear the movie, the radiator ticking, the laundromat's dryers humming below us, but quiet in the way that matters, the kind where the only sound that seems real is your own heartbeat slamming against your ribs. "Caleb," he said, so soft I almost missed it. "Yeah?" He didn't answer with words. He leaned in, slow, careful, like he was giving me 100 chances to stop him, and I felt his breath against my mouth, warm and a little unsteady, and every rational thought I owned evaporated. My eyes were already closing. My hand had somehow found the edge of his sleeve. Then his phone rang. He jerked back like he'd been burned. It was his mother. His abuela was in the hospital, nothing serious, but he had to go, had to leave right now, and by the time he came back that night I was pretending to be asleep and he was pretending to believe me, and neither of us ever mentioned the 3 inches of space that almost didn't exist between us. We didn't talk about it. Not that week, not that month. We got good, frighteningly good, at pretending it hadn't happened. But something had shifted, and pretending didn't put it back. If you've never watched a friendship quietly bleed out, I hope you never have to. It doesn't look like a fight. There's no slammed door, no dramatic goodbye. It looks like shorter answers. Doors that used to stay open, closing. A person you used to tell everything, suddenly a person you're editing yourself around. Ethan started staying later at the library. I started making plans that didn't include him, badly, obviously, the way you do when you're trying to prove something to yourself more than to anyone else. We were roommates who'd become strangers who happened to share a refrigerator. The worst part was I missed him even when he was 12 feet away. It came to a head in March, over something stupid, dishes, I think, or whose turn it was to pay the electric bill, some small thing that had nothing to do with what we were actually angry about. Voices got raised. Things got said that weren't really about dishes at all. "You've been weird for months," I said. "Just say it. Say what this is actually about." Ethan's jaw tightened. For a second I thought he might actually do it, might finally say the thing neither of us had let ourselves say since October. Instead he grabbed his jacket. "I can't do this right now," he said, and left. He didn't come home that night. Or the next. I lay awake in the quiet apartment, staring at a ceiling I'd memorized every crack of, and understood, with a kind of grief I'd never felt before, that I'd rather have Ethan as a best friend who kept me at arm's length than not have him at all, and that I might be about to lose both options. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. "Ethan. Come outside. I want to show you something." He was leaning against his car when I got downstairs, hands shoved in his pockets, looking like he hadn't slept much better than I had. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. Then he just said, "Get in," and I did, because some things you don't question, you just do. He drove us 2 hours, out past the city, past the highway exits I recognized from childhood road trips, until the buildings thinned into farmland and the farmland thinned into woods I hadn't seen since I was maybe 10 years old. "Ethan, where are we? You remember this place?" And then I did. My chest went tight. It was my grandfather's old property, the one my family sold when I was 12, the one with the treehouse my dad and I built the summer before everything got complicated with my parents' divorce. I hadn't been back here in 8 years. I didn't even know Ethan knew it existed. I must have mentioned it once, years ago, in some late-night conversation I barely remembered having. He'd found it. He'd remembered. He'd driven 2 hours to bring me back to the one place in the world that had ever felt like it was entirely, uncomplicatedly mine. The treehouse was smaller than I remembered, weathered gray, one wall bowed with age, but it was still standing. Ethan climbed the ladder first, holding a hand down for me even though I didn't need it, and I took it anyway, because some part of me had been waiting 3 years to hold that hand and mean something by it. Inside, he'd brought a blanket, 2 thermoses, and a string of battery-powered fairy lights that he clumsily wound around a support beam while I watched him, throat tight, unable to speak. "I've been a coward," he said finally, sitting across from me in the small golden light. "Since October. I've been running from something because I was scared of what it meant, and I hurt you doing it, and I am so sorry, Caleb." "Ethan. Let me finish. Please." His hands were shaking again, the way they had in that text message that started all of this. "I've been in love with you since sophomore year. Probably longer, if I'm honest with myself, which I clearly wasn't very good at doing. And that night on the couch, I wasn't scared of kissing you. I was scared of how much I wanted to. Because if I kissed you and it changed everything, and then it fell apart, I didn't think I'd survive losing you twice, once as whatever we almost were, and once as my best friend." The fairy lights flickered gold across his face. Somewhere outside, Wind moved through leaves that had watched me grow up. I felt like the 12-year-old who used to sit in this exact spot and believe, stupidly and completely, that anything was possible. So I ran instead, Ethan said, quieter now. And I made everything worse. And I brought you back here because this is the place you told me about the night I first realized I never wanted to stop knowing you. I wanted to ask you, in the place that means the most to you, if there's any chance at all, that you feel even a fraction of what I feel. My hands found his in the small space between us. They were still shaking. So were mine. Ethan, I said, I have been in love with you since the day you cursed out our doorframe. Something broke open in his face, relief and disbelief and hope all colliding at once. He laughed, a wet, startled sound, and leaned forward the way he had that night on the couch, slow, giving me every chance to stop him. I didn't stop him. This time, no phone rang. I woke up the next morning in my own bed, alone, and for one disorienting second I thought the treehouse had been a dream, one of those unbearably vivid ones that leaves you grieving something that never happened. Then I heard the kitchen sounds. Pans. Ethan, humming something off-key. The smell of coffee and burnt toast, which had always been his signature disaster of a breakfast. I found him at the stove in yesterday's rumpled shirt, hair a wreck, looking more at peace than I'd seen him look in months. He glanced up when I walked in and went a little pink, like the morning light had made the whole thing suddenly, terrifyingly real. Hey, he said. Hey. I didn't know I wasn't sure if last night was going to feel different in daylight. If you'd want to take it back. I crossed the kitchen, took the spatula gently out of his hand, set it down, and kissed him, soft, unhurried, nothing like the desperate, disbelieving thing in the treehouse the night before. This one was quieter. Steadier. A promise instead of a question. Does that answer it? I asked against his mouth. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since October. What followed wasn't some dramatic, cinematic transformation. It was smaller than that, and better. It was Ethan reaching for my hand under the table at dinner like it was the most natural thing in the world, when 3 days earlier he'd have flinched from the thought. It was falling asleep on the couch mid-movie and waking up tangled together instead of politely apart. It was the fan still running in winter, except now I fell asleep to the sound of it and the sound of him breathing beside me, and neither one felt separate from the other anymore. We didn't announce anything. We didn't need to, not at first. Our friends had apparently been placing bets since sophomore year, and the general reaction to the news wasn't shock so much as relief, the kind of finally that makes you realize everyone could see what you'd spent years too scared to. Everyone except Ethan's family. I should have known it would come up eventually. You don't build a wall that thick without there being something behind it. It was April, 6 weeks into us being us, when Ethan's mother called to say she and his father were coming up for his cousin's graduation and wanted to take him to dinner. Just him. I watched something close behind his eyes the second he hung up the phone. You don't have to come, he said, too quickly, already turning away to busy himself with something that didn't need doing. It's just a family thing. Ethan. It's fine, Caleb. It wasn't fine. I could see it wasn't fine in the way his shoulders had climbed up around his ears, the way his hands had gone still instead of restless, which for Ethan was always the more dangerous sign. Have you told them? I asked quietly. About us? The silence that followed answered before he did. It's complicated, he finally said. My dad's not, he's not like your parents. He has opinions. Loud ones. About what a Korean son is supposed to be, supposed to want, supposed to bring home. He rubbed a hand over his face. I've spent my whole life being exactly what he expected. Top of my class. Pre-law. The son who calls every Sunday. I don't know how to also be the son who's in love with his college roommate. I don't know if there's room in his head for both versions of me to exist. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat down next to him and took his hand, the way he'd taught me to sit in silence without trying to fix it. "I'm not asking you to tell him," I said eventually. "I'm asking you not to disappear into this the way you disappeared in October. Talk to me. Don't go quiet on me again. That's the only thing I can't survive twice." He looked at me then, something raw and grateful moving across his face. "I won't," he said. "I promise. This is different. You're different." I believed him. I wanted to believe him so badly that I didn't notice, not for another 2 weeks, how much smaller his promises had started to feel next to the size of what he was actually carrying. He went to dinner alone. I stayed home and told myself that was fine, that this was his story to tell on his own timeline, that love didn't require me to be in every room of his life immediately. He came home after 11, and I knew before he said a word that it had gone badly. Not explosively badly. Ethan's father, from what little I knew, wasn't a shouter. He was worse than that. He was a man who could make disappointment feel like a verdict, delivered so calmly it left no room for appeal. He asked when I was going to settle down and stop wasting time, Ethan said, dropping onto the couch like his legs had given out. Asked if there was a girl at school. I said no. He said good, plenty of time for that later, focus on the LSAT. He laughed, but it wasn't really a laugh. I sat there and let him build me a whole future I have no intention of living, and I didn't say a single word to stop him. "Ethan. I'm not ready," he said, before I could finish. "I know that's not fair to you. I know you deserve someone who isn't scared. But I'm not ready, Caleb, and I don't know when I will be, and I hate that I can't give you an answer." "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," I said carefully. "I'm asking you to let me be there. Whatever pace this needs to happen at, I can do slow. I can't do alone. There's a difference." He nodded, but I watched him fold in on himself over the next several days anyway, quieter at dinner, later at the library again, the same slow retreat I recognized from October, except this time I knew what it was, and knowing didn't make it hurt less. Then came the night I saw the message on his phone, lit up on the counter while he was in the shower, his father, texting about a family friend's daughter, a nice girl, pre-med, you two should meet. And under it, Ethan's reply. "Sure. Set it up." I stood in the kitchen for a long time after that, staring at 4 words that felt like they'd cracked something open in my chest. I didn't yell. I'm not built that way, and honestly, yelling wouldn't have touched the thing that actually hurt. "You're setting up a date," I said, when he came out of the bathroom, towel around his neck, still not knowing I'd seen. "With a girl your dad picked out." His face went white. "Caleb, it's not, I would never actually go through with." "Then why say yes?" "Because it was easier than saying no. Because every time my dad brings up my future I feel 15 years old again, and I say whatever makes the conversation end fastest, and I know that's messed up, I know it's not fair to you." "It's not about fair," I said, and my voice cracked in a way I hated. "It's about whether I'm someone you're building a life with, or someone you're hiding in the meantime. Because right now, Ethan, it feels like the second one. And I told you in the treehouse, I can survive almost anything except you going quiet on me again. And you promised me you wouldn't." "I know what I promised." "Then why does it feel exactly like October?" He didn't have an answer. That was somehow worse than if he had. I grabbed my jacket. I didn't slam the door, I was too tired for that kind of anger, but I closed it quietly behind me, and something about the quiet felt more final than any slammed door could have. I walked for a long time that night, past the laundromat, past the campus, out toward the edge of town where the streetlights got sparse and the sky opened up into more stars than the city usually let you see. I thought about my grandfather's land. I thought about a boy who'd once driven 2 hours to bring me somewhere he thought I needed to be, and I wondered, with an ache that felt like grief, whether that same boy now needed something I didn't know how to give him, time, or courage, or a version of his father who didn't exist. I didn't know, walking home in the dark that night, that the hardest conversation of our entire relationship was still ahead of us, or that it would take place in the very last spot either of us expected. I stayed at my friend Marcus's apartment for 4 days after that night, long enough to breathe, not long enough to stop missing the sound of the fan running, or the particular way Ethan cleared his throat before he was about to say something he'd been building up the courage to say. We didn't talk. Not really. A few logistics texts about the electric bill, nothing more. I told myself the silence was mutual, that we both needed space, but underneath that story was a quieter, more honest one. I was scared that if I reached out first, I'd hear the same thing again, I'm not ready, and I didn't know how many more times I could survive hearing it. Marcus, to his credit, let me sulk for exactly 3 days before he sat me down with 2 mugs of bad instant coffee and said, "You know he's miserable too, right? Priya saw him at the library. Said he looked like a ghost. That's not really my problem to fix." Didn't say it was. I'm saying misery isn't proof someone doesn't love you. Sometimes it's proof they're a coward who loves you and hasn't figured out how to be brave about it yet. Those aren't the same thing, Caleb. I didn't want to hear that. I heard it anyway, the way you hear the things that are actually true even when you'd rather they weren't. On the 5th day, I finally went back to the apartment to collect more clothes. Ethan wasn't there. What was there, sitting on my side of the bed like it had been placed with great care, was an envelope with my name on it in his handwriting. I sat down on the edge of the mattress and opened it with hands that weren't quite steady. Caleb. I've started this letter 11 times. I know because I counted the balled-up pages in the trash, which is a very on-brand way for me to try to say something important, write around it for 2 hours before I actually say it. I'm not going to write around it this time. You were right. About all of it. I told myself I was protecting you by keeping you separate from the parts of my life that scared me, but that's not protection, that's cowardice wearing protection's clothes. I've spent my whole life being so good at becoming whatever the room needed me to be, the perfect student, the reliable son, the friend who never causes problems, that I never learned how to just be a person who wants something and says so, out loud, even when it costs him something. You cost me nothing, Caleb. You have never once cost me anything. My father's expectations cost me something. My own fear costs me something. You are the one thing in the last 3 years that has only ever given. I called him my dad. 2 nights ago, after you left. I told him everything, about you, about the treehouse, about how long I've loved you and how long I let being scared get in the way of saying it to anyone who mattered, including you. It didn't go the way I wanted. He said things I'm still figuring out how to carry. But I'm not writing to tell you it has a fairy tale ending, because I don't know yet if it does. I'm writing to tell you that for the first time in my whole life, I said the true thing instead of the easy thing, and I did it because you taught me, just by being exactly, unapologetically yourself, that the true thing is always worth more, even when it's harder. I'm not asking you to come back tonight. I know that's not something a letter fixes. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what almost losing you was trying to teach me. If you ever want to talk, I'll be at the treehouse. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Whenever you're ready, however long that takes. I'll wait. I love you. I should have said that on the couch in October instead of letting a phone call decide what happened next. I read it 3 times. Then I sat very still for a long time, the way you do when something enormous has just rearranged the furniture of your chest. It took me 9 days to be ready. Not because I doubted him, the letter had settled something in me that I hadn't realized was still shaking, but because I needed, for the first time in this whole relationship, to make sure I was choosing this with clear eyes and not just relief. On the 9th day, I borrowed Marcus's car and drove the 2 hours myself, retracing a route I'd only ever taken as a passenger. My chest was tight the entire way, somewhere between hope and terror, which I was starting to understand were closer cousins than anyone tells you. The treehouse ladder looked exactly the same. I climbed it slowly, heart going harder with every rung, and found Ethan sitting inside with the same fairy lights, unlit this time, and a thermos he hadn't touched. He looked up. Stood so fast he nearly hit his head on the low ceiling. "You came," he said, like he hadn't quite let himself believe I would. "You said you'd wait. I figured I should stop making you wait longer than necessary." Neither of us moved for a second. Then he reached out, slow, the same careful slowness as that first almost kiss, still leaving me every chance to step back, and I closed the distance myself this time. "Tell me about the call," I said, once we'd settled onto the blanket, my hand still caught in his like neither of us wanted to test what happened if we let go. "The real version. Not the letter version." Ethan exhaled. He said he needed time. "That's it, really. Not get out, not you're not my son, just time. Which honestly might be worse in some ways, because at least anger has an ending. Time doesn't come with a deadline." He looked down at our joined hands. "My mom called 2 days later, though. Just to say she loved me. Didn't mention you, didn't mention any of it, just wanted me to know that part hadn't changed. I'll take it. It's not everything. But it's not nothing, either. And if he never comes around?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering the question with more honesty than I think he'd have managed a month earlier. "Then I lose something that matters," he finally said. "I'm not going to pretend that wouldn't hurt. But I already tried the version of my life where I protect that relationship by hiding this one, and all it did was cost me you. I'm not doing that math again. You're not the thing I'm willing to lose to keep everyone else comfortable. Not anymore." I felt something in my chest finally, fully unclench. 3 years of careful pretending, 2 almost kisses, 1 devastating silence, all of it settling into something that finally, actually felt like solid ground. "I love you too," I said, answering the letter out loud, in the place where all of it had started. For what it's worth, I've been ready to say that since the doorframe. He laughed, the real laugh, the one from freshman year, unguarded and a little too loud for the small wooden room, and kissed me the way he hadn't let himself in October, certain, unhurried, no phone ringing to interrupt it this time. "Ethan's father still hasn't called. His mother has, every Sunday, and last month she asked, carefully, gently, if she could take the 2 of us to lunch next time she visits. Small steps. Not everything. Enough. We moved into a bigger apartment in the fall, one with a working radiator and a kitchen big enough for Ethan's continuing disaster attempts at cooking, which I have accepted I will be quietly rescuing for the rest of my life. Marcus still claims credit for basically getting us back together, which is generous math, but I let him have it. Some evenings, when the weight of everything gets loud, his father's silence, the LSAT he's still deciding whether he even wants to take, the shape of a future that looks nothing like what either of us was told to expect, we drive out to the treehouse anyway, just to sit in it. Not because we need it to fix anything. Just because it's ours. Because it's the place where a boy finally stopped running from the truth, and another boy finally stopped waiting to hear it. I used to think love was supposed to announce itself, fireworks, certainty, some cinematic moment where everything clicks into place all at once. I know better now. Sometimes it's a fan left running in winter. Sometimes it's a letter with 11 crumpled drafts behind it. Sometimes it's someone driving 2 hours back to the one place that ever made you feel like yourself, just to ask, quietly, if there's room for him there too. There was. There still is. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with us through this whole story. If it moved you even a little, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us which moment hit you hardest, and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Because Ethan's father hasn't had his last word yet, and neither has Ethan. I should back up, because the 6 months I glossed over in the last chapter weren't as clean as I made them sound. There was a stretch in December that nearly broke us again, and it deserves telling properly, because that's the part where I learned love isn't proven in the easy months. It's proven in the ones you almost don't survive. It started with an invitation. My mother, who had met Ethan exactly twice and adored him both times, sent out her usual chaotic mass text about Christmas dinner: "Bring whoever you want, the more the merrier, I'm making too much food as usual." I forwarded it to Ethan without thinking twice. In my head, it wasn't even a question. Of course he'd come. We were together. This was what together meant. He went quiet for 2 days after I sent it. "You don't have to answer my mom's text like you're solving a legal case," I finally said, half joking, half not, watching him stare at his phone at the kitchen table like it might bite him. "It's not your mom's text I'm stuck on," he said. "It's the timing. My dad's coming up that same week, my aunt's retirement thing. If I go to your family's Christmas instead of the retirement dinner, it's not subtle anymore, Caleb. Everyone will know exactly what it means. Where I chose to be. Isn't that the point?" I asked, quieter now. "Choosing?" He didn't answer that night. Or the next. I recognized the shape of what was happening, the same slow retreat, the same careful silence, and this time, instead of grabbing my jacket and walking out into the dark, I made myself stay in the room with it. Marcus's advice had stuck with me: misery isn't proof someone doesn't love you. So I sat across from Ethan at that kitchen table, night after night, not pushing, just present, the way he'd once taught me to sit inside someone else's silence without trying to fix it. On the third night, he finally spoke without me asking. "I'm scared that if I keep choosing you out loud, in front of everyone, there won't be a version of my dad left to come back to," he said, voice low. "And I'm scared that if I keep protecting a version of him that might not even exist anymore, I'll lose you instead. I don't know how to want both things without one of them costing me the other." "You don't," I said gently. "That's the truth nobody tells you about growing up, Ethan. Sometimes there isn't a version where you keep everyone. Sometimes love means choosing, and choosing means grieving what you don't pick. I can't make that easier. I can only tell you I'm not going anywhere while you figure out which grief you can actually carry." He came to Christmas. He sat at my mother's overcrowded table, let my little cousins interrogate him about his boyfriend status with the shameless bluntness only 9-year-olds have, and laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. Later that night, on my parents' back porch, wrapped in a blanket against the cold, he told me it was the first Christmas in his life that had felt like it belonged to him instead of to someone else's expectations. His father's retirement dinner happened without him. Nobody called to ask where he'd been. Ethan told me, staring up at a sky full of more stars than the city usually allowed, that the silence hurt less than he'd expected, not because he didn't care, but because for the first time, the silence was a choice he'd made on purpose, instead of one that had been made for him. I want to give Marcus his due, because he's been mostly a punchline in this story so far, and he deserves better than that. He's the reason I survived the 4 days I spent on his couch back in the spring, and he's the reason I understood, eventually, what I was watching happen between me and Ethan long before I was ready to admit it myself. Marcus had known Ethan almost as long as I had. They'd been in the same intro chemistry class freshman year, bonded over a shared hatred of their lab TA, and stayed loosely close ever since, in the specific way college friendships sometimes do, not central to each other's lives, but a fixed, reliable point on the map. "You want to know when I knew?" He asked me once, months later, the two of us splitting a pizza in his cramped kitchen while Ethan was at the library. "Sophomore year. Party at Jenna's place. You'd had exactly one too many, and you spent 45 minutes telling me about some documentary on deep-sea creatures Ethan had made you watch. Not even a good documentary, Caleb. You hated it. But you talked about it like it was the greatest thing you'd ever experienced, because he'd been the one to show it to you. That doesn't prove anything." "It proves everything," Marcus said, unbothered. "People don't light up like that over content. They light up like that over who they experienced the content with. You'd been in love with him for a year before you had the first almost kiss. I just watched you both take the long way around admitting it. I thought about that a lot, afterward, how much of love isn't the big cinematic moment, the treehouse, the letter, the almost kiss on the couch, but the accumulation of 1,000 small unremarkable Tuesdays where you keep choosing to notice someone, to remember the specific way they laugh, to save the good parts of your day to tell them later. The treehouse was the moment the story turned into something worth telling. But the real love had been built in the parts nobody would think to film. It was February when Ethan's father finally called. I wasn't there for it. Ethan had stepped out onto the balcony, phone pressed hard to his ear, and I busied myself in the kitchen pretending not to watch him through the glass door, pretending my whole body wasn't tuned to the shape of his shoulders for any sign of how it was going. He came back inside 15 minutes later. His face gave nothing away, which after 2 years of reading every one of his expressions, told me more than any expression could have. He wants to see me, Ethan said slowly, like he was still testing whether the words were real. Just me, at first. Coffee, this weekend. He didn't say anything about you, or any of it. But he called, Caleb. He's the one who called. How do you feel? Terrified, he admitted. Hopeful. Both, somehow, at the same time, which doesn't seem like it should be possible but apparently is. I didn't go to that coffee. I wasn't invited, and more than that, I understood, the way I'd learned to understand over the past year, that some conversations have to happen without an audience, even a loving one. I spent the 2 hours pacing our apartment, checking my phone every 4 minutes, rehearsing what I'd say if it went badly, what I'd say if it went well, and discovering I had no idea how to prepare for either. Ethan came home quiet. Not the frightening quiet of October, a different kind, one I hadn't seen from him before. Thoughtful. Unsteady, but not broken. He apologized, Ethan said, sitting down heavily at our kitchen table, the same table where he'd once sat frozen over a text from my mother. Not a big speech. My dad doesn't really do big speeches. He just said he'd had time to think, and that he'd rather have a son who's honest with him than a son who tells him what he wants to hear. He asked about you. Used your name, Caleb. First time he's ever said your name out loud in front of me. Ethan, that's huge. It's not everything, he said carefully, echoing, without realizing it, the exact words I'd once said to him about his mother's calls. He didn't ask to meet you. Not yet. He's still figuring out what he believes versus what he was taught to believe, and I think that's going to take him longer than one coffee. But he called. He used your name. 6 months ago, I didn't think that sentence would ever be true. I sat down across from him and took his hand, the way I had in the treehouse, the way I had 100 ordinary Tuesdays since. Then we take it, I said. However far it goes, however slow it comes. Some things you don't need to be everything on day one. They just need to be moving in the right direction. He smiled, the crinkled eyes smile, the one that always arrived half a second before the rest of his face caught up, and for a moment, in our small kitchen with the working radiator and the mismatched chairs and 2 years of small unremarkable Tuesdays behind us, everything felt, for the first time in a long time, entirely, uncomplicatedly whole. It came in March, almost a year to the week since the treehouse, a text from Ethan, forwarded from his mother's number, that made my stomach drop and lift at the same time. Dad wants to have you both over for dinner. He asked specifically. Said he'd like to actually meet you this time. I read it twice, then a third time, sitting on the edge of our bed with my heart doing something complicated in my chest. You don't have to say yes, Ethan said, watching me from the doorway, his voice careful in a way that told me he was more nervous than he was letting on. If it's too soon, if you're not ready. Are you ready? He considered that honestly, which was one of the things I loved most about him. He'd stopped giving quick, easy answers to hard questions somewhere in the last year, stopped saying whatever made the conversation end fastest. I don't know, he admitted. But I think I'd rather find out with you there than without you. I think that's the whole point, actually. I don't want a version of my relationship with my dad that doesn't have room for you in it. If this dinner is him trying to make room, I want to show up for that. Together. I thought about the boy who'd once said yes to a date with a stranger just to make an uncomfortable phone call end sooner, and I thought about the man standing in front of me now, choosing the harder, truer thing on purpose. The distance between those two versions of him was the whole story, really, the whole reason any of this had been worth surviving. Then we go, I said. Together. Ethan's parents lived in a tidy brick house 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of house with a porch swing nobody used and a garden his mother clearly loved more than she talked about. I stood on that porch with a bottle of wine sweating in my grip, feeling more nervous than I had climbing the treehouse ladder for the first time. "You look like you're about to take the bar exam," Ethan murmured, adjusting my collar with a small, fond laugh that didn't quite cover his own nerves. "I might actually prefer the bar exam." His mother opened the door before we could ring the bell, a small, warm woman with Ethan's exact smile, who pulled me into a hug like we'd known each other for years instead of two brief hellos at graduation events. "Caleb," she said, like my name was something she'd been looking forward to saying. "I'm so glad you came." Ethan's father was harder to read. He was standing in the kitchen doorway when we walked in, tall, composed, the kind of stillness that filled a room without needing volume to do it. For a long second, nobody said anything. Then he extended his hand. "Mr. Park," I said, shaking it, my voice steadier than I felt. "Caleb." He said my name carefully, like he was still getting used to the shape of it in his mouth, still practicing something he hadn't let himself practice before. "Thank you for coming." I imagine that wasn't an easy invitation to accept. It wasn't, I admitted. There didn't seem to be any point pretending otherwise, and some instinct told me he'd respect the honesty more than he'd respect politeness. But Ethan thought it was worth showing up for. So did I. Something shifted behind his eyes, not warmth exactly, not yet, but the beginning of something that might become warmth eventually, if it was given enough time and enough truth to grow into. Dinner was quiet at first, careful in the way first dinners often are, polite questions about my major, my family, safe territory neither of us had to think too hard to navigate. Ethan sat between us, visibly holding his breath through most of it, like he was watching two countries negotiate a treaty he badly needed to succeed. It was over dessert that his father finally set down his fork and looked at me directly. "I owe you an apology," he said, and the table went very still. "Not just Ethan. You as well." I spent a long time being angry about something I didn't understand, and I let that anger cost my son almost a year of honesty with me. I've had time to think about why that anger was there in the first place, and most of what I found wasn't really about Ethan, or about you. It was about a version of the future I'd built in my head without ever asking him if he wanted to live in it. Ethan had gone very still beside me. "I'm not going to pretend I have all of this figured out," his father continued, choosing his words with the same careful weight he seemed to bring to everything. "I was raised to believe certain things were simply how the world worked, and unlearning that isn't instant, even when you want it to be. But I watched my son light up in a way I hadn't seen in years when he talks about you. I watched him choose honesty with me even when it cost him something. That has to count for more than my discomfort. I'd like the chance to know you properly, Caleb, not as an apology I'm performing, but because you clearly matter to my son, and my son matters more to me than any picture I had of his life before I actually knew what was true." I felt my throat tighten in a way I hadn't expected. Beside me, Ethan reached for my hand under the table, not hiding it this time, not flinching, just holding on, in front of his father, like it was the most natural thing in the world. His father saw. And said nothing about it, which, from a man who'd spent a year saying nothing at all, felt like its own kind of grace. Later, after his mother had insisted on packing us leftovers we didn't need and hugged me again on the way out, Ethan and I sat together on that unused porch swing, letting it creak gently under us in the cool spring night. "That went better than I let myself imagine," Ethan said quietly, still a little stunned. "I spent a year preparing for every version of tonight except the one where it actually went okay." "He's trying," I said. "That's not nothing. That's actually the whole thing, I think, not a person becoming perfect overnight, but a person deciding to keep trying even when it's uncomfortable. You did the same thing, remember? Nobody hands you the finished version. You build it. Ethan turned to look at me, the porch light catching the same crinkle-eyed smile I'd fallen for in a dorm room 3 years earlier, over a doorframe and a duffel bag and a joke that had somehow turned into the rest of my life. I used to think the treehouse was the ending of our story, he said. The big moment. Turns out it was just the place we finally started telling the truth. Everything since has been the actual story. Good, I said, leaning into him, the porch swing creaking under both of us. I like this version better anyway. Nobody has to almost lose anybody for it to keep going. He kissed my temple, soft and unhurried, the kind of kiss that didn't need to prove anything to anyone, and for a long time we just sat there, 2 grown men on a porch swing his mother had probably been hoping someone would finally use, watching the stars come out over a house that, for the first time, felt like it had room for both of us in it. We went back to the treehouse this spring, the way we do most springs now. It's a little more weathered each time, the wood a little grayer, but it's still standing, still ours. Ethan brought the same fairy lights. I brought better coffee than his usual burnt toast attempts. His father came up for a visit last month, the first time he stayed the whole weekend, the first time he slept on our old, slightly lumpy pull-out couch instead of finding a reason to head home early. He and Ethan went for a walk on Sunday morning, just the two of them, and came back different somehow, lighter, like something that had been sitting heavy between them for years had finally been set down. I don't know exactly where all of this ends up. Neither does Ethan. But I've stopped needing the ending to be certain to know that what we have is real, built out of 1,000 ordinary Tuesdays, one terrifying almost kiss, a letter with 11 crumpled drafts behind it, and a treehouse that once belonged to a 12-year-old who had no idea it would someday hold the most important conversation of his life. Some love stories are fireworks. Ours was a fan left running in winter, and a boy brave enough, eventually, to stop running from the truth. If this story meant something to you, hit like, drop a comment telling us your favorite moment, and subscribe. There's more where this came from. Because somewhere out there, Ethan's father is still learning how to say the words he never got taught how to say, and there might be one more conversation left to tell. Should I show you what he finally says? Let me know below.